The internet has taken over our lives. You might have seen this updated version of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where Wi-Fi has become more important to us than basic sustenance like food and shelter. But with the pervasiveness of online use, what has also increased is the amount of information being gathered about us, and generally by private corporations. Every single breath we take, every single move we make, we are being watched. And yes, that is from a famous Police song.
I'll be watching you.
Data about our heart rate is being gathered by our smartwatches. Data about which cities we visited, which bars we hopped, how many steps we took when we went downstairs to pick up our mail is being stored and gathered in data centers spread around the world. Now, why is this data being gathered? The argument that tech companies make is that the more data they have about us, the better products they're able to build for us that we love. So for instance, when Google gathers data about our movement and the places we visit through Google Maps, it makes Google Maps much more better, and we are able to find ourselves in the middle of a tiny street in Cuba or in a village in Pakistan. We can get around now better than ever because of Google Maps being as awesome as it is. As we talked in the last 2 episodes, the business model for Google and Facebook is through ad revenue. So this data is used to serve more relevant ads to us through ad tech software, or to do it more efficiently. Serving these ads across multiple platforms and multiple websites that we visit is more likely to make us click on that ad and to eventually, maybe after some research, buy that product. Now, there is nothing wrong with this process, and it is taken from the oldest marketing tactics in the book. But when it becomes a problem is when user activity data is collected across multiple platforms, apps, and websites, and then it is connected to a demographic profile of the user, for instance, their location, their gender, their preferences, how much time they spent on a website. When all this information is put together by the ad tech company, then it builds a user profile for you. This type of advertising is called behavioral advertising, and this is why we see similar kinds of ads popping up across our different web pages and activity. Lately, pretty much every website we visit asks us to accept its cookies, right? Now, I don't know about you, but generally when I'm surfing the internet, I'm like in a hurry to get the information I need and get the hell out, right? So I'm likely to press yes or no on these cookies without reading much detail. Now that brings up the question of what is the purpose of these cookies and why do we need to be bothered about it? When you visit a website that uses cookies, and almost all websites use cookies now, a small text file with basic information about you is stored in the web browser. Since publishers have moved to programmatic advertising, they open up their websites to a lot of these trackers and also third-party trackers which keep an eye on user activity on their website. But if you look at the number of trackers which are accessing that user data, sometimes it is impossible to identify which these websites are or which these trackers are or where this user data is going. Now at this point, if you're anything like my mom, you're going to say, I don't really care if Facebook has all of my data, or I don't really care if my data is being stored across different web pages, right? Because let's be honest, platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram have allowed all of us to build the narratives of our lives online. We all write our own autobiographies and stylize them in whatever way we want to be remembered or known. We might even like the idea of being shown ads that are relevant to us. So let's say a diaper commercial or ad does not pop up in a teenager's newsfeed, right? So who cares? Why it matters is unfortunately multifold. Apart from the very obvious government surveillance aspect, where in countries like Russia or China, online user behavior is being tracked, and sometimes in the United States as well. And that is a bit of an issue, but our data is also being shared with third parties that we did not give permission to use our personal information. This increases consumer risk, and this is also why we are seeing a spike in cyber crimes and online identity theft. So basically, when we share our information with one website or one platform, it could be shared with an unlimited number of websites and platforms. So you're not just saying yes to one. This data can also be used in more convoluted forms, such as the Cambridge Analytica use case, where millions of Facebook users' data was used to target their political preferences or voting preferences in the United States. Now, in 2018, the European Union, which is the political and economic union of 27 European countries, implemented one of the strictest privacy and security laws in world history, called the GDPR, or General Data Protection Regulation. The main reason for passing these laws was that US-based companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Twitter were gathering data about European Union nationals and then manipulating this information for their own business ends. This kind of activity of private entities in a nation state gathering personal data about another nation state's nationals would have been unthinkable a few decades ago or before we started becoming so open with the internet, and might even have consisted of espionage in a different era. Now, the GDPR is extremely expansive and rather complex, but essentially the maximum of 20 million euros or 4% of world revenue turnover can be fined to these companies who break the GDPR regulation and laws. The GDPR is meant to give back control and ownership of user data back to the users rather than external parties owning this data. It is also meant to protect users from data breaches caused by third-party trackers, or to even allow them a right to be forgotten, which is basically if you were to say that, hey, I do not want this information of me to exist on the internet anywhere, you can contest that and you can make a case for it.
I think there's two things at stake here. One is our sort of digital citizens' right, that we have the right to our own data, to be forgotten, to understand what it is that we sign up for. Here I still think we have some way to go. You know, I'm the kind of person who reads terms and conditions for fun. We are very, very few. Most people, they just sign off. And I think we still have way to go to make sure that we do not only have rights, but that we can also exercise our rights. The second thing, of course, is what kind of responsibility will a platform have?
Now, we won't get into the nitty-gritty of GDPR, which is a sweeping regulation over here, but these are the 7 main principles of the GDPR and give a good sense of what they're trying to do with this regulation. Number 1, lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. This is required of all organizations in the US that use European nationals' data. And it's basically the very, very long terms and conditions that we say yes to very quickly. Those are required by this law to be provided to us so that we understand what we are agreeing to. Number 2, purpose limitation. This is about gathering user data or using user data only for the purpose as stated by the organization and not for any other purpose. Number 3, data minimization. This means that only the relevant amount of data should be gathered, which is for above purpose, correct? So for instance, if I give access to Facebook to my user data and tell them that they can use it to make the news feed more exciting, then they cannot use my data from, let's say, Tumblr or some other web page that I haven't given them access to. They can only gather the data that they say serves their purpose. 4, accuracy. This means that a user can contest inaccurate or incomplete information about themselves that might live on the internet. 5, storage limitation. This means that, let's say I delete my Facebook account. That means that Facebook cannot keep my user data on its cloud or somewhere around the world anymore. Number 6, integrity and confidentiality. This means that personal data must be stored or gathered in a way that ensures security of that data. Number 7, accountability. This is pretty clear where the organizations or company are accountable to follow all of these regulations in GDPR region. Now, on January 21, 2019, the French Data Protection Authority imposed a fine of 50 million euros on Google LLC under the EU General Data Protection Regulations Act, so the GDPR. This was the largest fine put against any tech companies under the GDPR so far. Most recently, Google's appeal was also rejected in the French courts. Now, GDPR is providing a good starting point for these privacy regulations, and it's providing a framework that is being used around the world right now to come up with more regulations against big tech when it comes to privacy laws and user data tracking. Similar regulations are currently under discussion at a federal level in the United States, but there is no general overarching law that has been passed so far. Following GDPR, California became the first state in the United States to pass its own version of privacy laws called the California Consumer Privacy Act, or the CCPA, in June 2018. In 2019, Nevada followed suit and passed its own privacy laws, which gave consumers in the state the right to opt out of the sale of their personal information. And a couple of weeks back, Virginia also passed similar laws at state level.